meeting to order. Would someone move item 1.02 to approve the agenda?
Move it.
Second.
Are there any additions or corrections?
No, they are not. They're not.
All right, if there's nothing else, Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
I'm missing two people. Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons.
She's a yes.
Okay. All right. Did I get everybody? Because I can't see everybody all of a sudden.
Did you get Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Next is a reminder that in lieu of our public forum, we ask that if you want to share any thoughts or have any questions, you may do so by emailing clerk@fulton.cnyric.org. And excuse me. And someone will respond back to you, most likely the superintendent, but it could be someone else. And you can also find this email at the district website in case you didn't get a chance to write that down. Item number 1.04, approve the February 8th minutes.
Move it.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo,
Yes.
and Mrs. Lyons.
Yes.
Are there any questions with regard to the items listed under the president's report? We have a number of committee meetings as well as regular board meetings listed. Also, to mark on your calendar, the evening that we're going to meet to approve the city administrative budget. And that's not a regular Tuesday night, so I just want everyone to pay note to that. And the reason that is because it has to be on this particular night. Every component district will be meeting that night. All right, if there's no questions there, unless David, is there anything you wanted to say about that budget?
I really don't think so, but if you have questions, Chris Todd is always willing to come to our board meeting and do any kind of presentation that we would request of him.
All right, thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave, for bringing that up, because that was something actually was on my list as well. If that is something the board would like, I know we have a number of new members. If that would be something, we just need to set that up with Chris, as Dave was indicating.
Well, if you let me know, if there's an interest, I'll let you know, Brian, or do you want them to reach out directly to you, board members?
Or that I can do a summary of that budget, which we've done. We've done it both ways in the past, Robin. So I can either do the summary or we could have Mr. Todd come and present as well.
And Mike Shepard is always willing to entertain any questions, and Chris defers to him. So board members can reach out to Mike as well at BOCES.
All right. So if you have any interest, please let Brian or I know, and we'll arrange accordingly. If we don't hear from anybody, we won't arrange anything. All right. Brian, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening. Thank you and welcome. Just want to extend our girls just had a hard-fought one-point loss out there, so we were cheering for them tonight. Our teams have done extremely well this fall. Our strategic coherence plan, our family engagement, is this evening. I'm going to ask Mr. Carroll to help out this evening. Do you want me to drive, Dan, or do you want to? I can, if you want.
Popping up any second.
All right, you beat me to it.
Here it comes.
So on the family engagement one, there's a couple of slides you want to just to remind you, we always come to our mission and our vision, everything that we're doing. This is the 6th part of our strategic coherence plan that we are highlighting. If you remember, we've done the other 5 parts. This is the last part, is our family engagement. And everything we're doing really comes back to our mission and our vision. Next slide, please. Coherence really comes down to sharing and understanding, creating a collective shared understanding, a collective commitment. And it really focuses on focusing the direction of our work, cultivating that collaborative culture, deepening our learning and really digging in and learning and creating new knowledge and new skills. And then, of course, the securing accountability. The internal accountability is the internal we have to ourselves, from boards to superintendent to schools, classrooms to classrooms, schools to schools. It's that internal where we're constantly looking at each other, looking at that data. And then the external accountability is really whenever there are external measures such as assessments, things like that. So those are those external measures that they're talking about for external accountability. So next slide, please. Tonight, as I said, we've already done leadership, literacy, instruction, social emotional development, health, and innovation. Tonight is family engagement. So if you could take us to the next slide, please. So this is the slide that really highlights our COVID stimulus funds by our strategic coherence plan areas. And as you can see, we've gone around the wheel before with instruction at 22% and social emotional developmental health. Together, they represent 43% of our budget. Tonight, we're talking about the family engagement part, which represents 4%. And we've also highlighted innovation before as well. So family engagement represents approximately 4%. And you can see those 4 areas. So there's around the culturally responsive family engagement coordinators, developing parent university, looking at a van for student and family support outreach, and developing staff capacity around culturally responsive family engagement. So really in those areas, those are some of the highlights that are there. Dan, you want to take us to the next slide, please?
Sure.
So Dan, why don't you go on from here?
Sure. Thank you. So family engagement is one of our areas in which the way we measure our efforts is really a kind of proof is in the pudding approach that we know our family engagement efforts pay off if our families tell us they do. So we have 4 items from our annual survey that we conduct. We'll be conducting that survey, I believe, in April or May. We have to decide on the date for sure, but those responses are what give us an indication as to whether we're engaging our families in the ways that we really need to be. I'm going to take a look at some of those specific strategic coherence plan items that are really prominent this year. And actually, I'm going to gloss over this slide for just a minute. Dr. Lisi's going to come back to this one at the end. One of the areas within family engagement where we really need to put in a lot of work in those culturally responsive family engagement coordinators that Mr. Palvino mentioned as one of the expenditures from our stimulus funds, they're going to devote their time to this in a big way. This is an example of a language access plan. So this is an idea that we're stealing a bit from a new state regulation that applies to municipal departments and other state agencies. This is not a requirement for schools yet. We expect that it will be. But what this does really is organizes all of an organization's efforts with regard to providing information in a way that's accessible to folks, families in our case, whose language at home is something other than English. This is a lot of work when you think about all the different forms of communication that come from a school district, and even beyond some of those obvious ones like our newsletters and website information, important documents such as IEPs, report cards. Each of these presents its own unique translation interpretation challenge. So this will be a way for us to really kind of hold ourselves accountable to making sure that we achieve these, this important communication function. Next, this is a look back at an item that our coaches introduced to us probably in December. Another of our SCP family engagement strategies is to develop a common K-12 template for sharing course and curricular information. We shared, like I say, and our coaches helped to share what's under development. You've got a little screenshot here of our pre-K through grade 12 learning outcomes website. If you recall, this is something that'll be accessible from our main district website by the end of the year. Families will be able to explore all that their child will learn by the end of each year and in each subject area. This is an interesting one in that while it was originally intended as a purely family communication piece, what we've learned is that it's become a great vehicle also for curricular alignment and other instructional activities and initiatives. And next, we have that strategy of developing a family engagement advisory board. This is one of the original recommendations from the Strategic Coherence Plan Steering Committee, and this will be up and running in earnest very, very soon. March 8th is the date we're targeting for a first meeting, and you'll all receive within a few days a blast inviting you to complete a form to express your interest in joining the Family Engagement Advisory Board. This will be another function largely by those culturally responsive family engagement coordinators. They'll be helping to recruit and build a really representative advisory board, representative both in terms of all of our schools being representative and grade levels being represented, but also just making an effort to include some voices that we haven't had in the past in our district-wide committees.
Dan,
yes.
could I ask you a question
Please.
with regard to this? In the event that someone doesn't get a blast, I'm just thinking about someone who may have changed their access, if it's by email or however you're sending it.
Yep.
They could call their school, perhaps,
Sure.
their building, to get a form sent, or how would you do that?
Mr. Lacey, this is a good segue to the communication mediums discussion.
Sure. Sure. Mr. Robbins, yeah, absolutely. They could contact their school building and the school would let us know either what their new updated contact information is, or we could send them a link to the form, or we can give them a hard form if needed.
So, and when you say you're going to get, what you're referring to is our families that we have information for will get the notification.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
And when we send out one of these blasts, they usually go via email and text. Is that right, Dr. Lacey? So
they do.
Right. We're also due for a family communication as well. So it'll go in there as well.
Exactly.
Which is blasted out many different ways. Dr. Lacey, you're going to put up the other slide that you wanted to work from? Yep. There
We
it is.
are.
Dr. Lacey.
Sure. So about a year and a half ago, we implemented the new Blackboard integrated communication system. And one of the benefits of that system was the ability for us to draw down the metrics for how we are reaching our stakeholders. And so this gives us a snapshot of kind of an accountability of where we are. So I just want to kind of go through this with you so you can see what we see and how effective that system is, just from left to right. This gives you an idea. For example, 686 messages have been sent out from the district to our stakeholders, and that means that could be from the district, from each building, and so on. And that's just for a period of 1 year from today. So February 1st, 2021 to current time. In addition to that, our app, which we've been relying on a great deal lately, we've had over 1,700 downloads of our app, and we do send out a lot of information via the app as well. And we would, again, encourage folks to use that resource. And just to continue the follow up on that last question, Robin, one of the things that we've been encouraging our families to do is ensure that we have the most up-to-date information. So we often send that out to folks. I know that that message comes out from our buildings to ensure that we have the right information in School Tool, because that's what drives this system. And you can see our website views over the past year. We've had over 221,000 views. That's quite a bit. And Facebook is interesting because that's just a 30-day snapshot of the traffic to our Facebook page, and that's just the district page itself. Over 3,200 views. We've reached 24,000 viewers. We have 5,600 page followers, and so on and so on. So our communication seems to be doing quite well, at least from a digital standpoint. And again, I want to reiterate that that's all this shows is our digital footprint with our stakeholders.
I asked Dom to collect this information because it's one that comes up a lot, how, and really get an idea of where our community is accessing information. So it shows the amount that, the number of times that we're communicating out, but also one of the questions constantly coming up is how often is our website actually accessed? And that's a pretty decent number, that's on there. I think this gives us a very nice baseline. The question always is, what's that balance between too much information, not enough information, and not overload, and so I think that's a piece. But what's good is that we're showing access. What I don't know is, is this typical or not? So now we have our own baseline, and we'll keep an eye on that data. But this is one that the communication committee often would bring up. How do we measure how often we're accessing? So I thought this was an interesting piece of data that we have. Discussion. Questions?
I do have some questions related, but they're to the policy proposals, the first reading. So I'm going to wait on that till that item comes up on the agenda.
Okay. If there's no other conversation here, we'll go with the budget. Don, you want to pull that up, please?
Sure.
Thank you. So once Dom gets it up here on the screen. So this is the time of year. There we go. Dom, if you want to, and also introduce your colleagues this evening that you brought from the business office before I get rolling here.
It'd be my pleasure. I'd like to introduce first Danielle DiBiase. She's on with us here tonight. Danielle will be serving as our business manager. So I'd like to welcome her to Fulton, and we look forward to having her and some great things. So Danielle, it's great to have you join us. And she may be answering some questions tonight, so I've asked her to join us. We'll be taking a team approach moving forward. So Danielle has joined us, and I also have Paula Hayden. Paula Hayden is our treasurer. Paula has been instrumental in keeping us going and keeping the office working as it should and our operations flowing smoothly. So I want to welcome Paula to our meeting as well.
Okay. So this is thank you and welcome. Our 22-23 budget and financials. So if you could take me to the next slide, please, Don. So on the tax cap calculation, each year we do a tax cap calculation. And on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line down, we also provided that in your board backup so you could actually see the form. But the bottom line is that 5th bullet, which really, after going through the formula, indicates that our maximum tax cap, as you know, you often hear as the 3rd bullet says in New York State, there's a 2% tax cap. But when you calculate the figure last year, if you look back, was 4.08%. This year, our allowable levy is 2.43%. And what that means is that if we decided to go to that max, so that was something we wanted to do, that would be $524,514.88 as far as an increase if we were to do that. And I just think it's one of those things that, so each year we have to calculate this and we have to turn it into the state of New York. We also, part of that is that you disclose that to the Board of Education. So that's our calculation for this year is 2.43%. And at the end of the presentation, you can actually see historically what has been our permissible and what has been the trend over the years. But you'll see that in a few minutes. Any questions on that slide? Okay, next slide, please. So if you were looking at this, we're going to be showing you a roll forward budget approximately 3.7% from 21-22 to 22-23, an increase of about 2.8, 2.1 million. And we'll show you that in just a moment. And we also like to provide the board, and we'll see the slides. You'll actually see the way that we laid it out. But this just gives you a great reference point as board members. So in other words, 1%, a 1% increase in our tax levy is equal to $216,133. So you can see the calculation for a 0.5, a 1.5, a 2.0, and a 2.43. We provide this every year just as board members. It's just great to be able to have that as a reference. If you're asked, what is the impact, this actually gives you a nice, easy reference point. Next slide, please. So this slide is a roll forward with 0% tax levy. Those of you that were on the call with Dr. Timms the other night with the Central New York School Boards Association, Dr. Timms actually during that presentation indicated that a new run had come out, which we're still trying to lock in from the state, but they tend to be on vacation this week apparently too. So on Thursday night last week, we had actually done these slides. Obviously, we've been working ahead and things like that. So what this slide actually includes is an additional $263,000 that Dr. Timms has indicated that's in there. Another district in our county, for example, actually declined by almost $50,000. So we actually increased on our foundation aid by $263,000. We are in the process of trying to confirm that number. So let's just remember that 324 includes the 263 in there. If we go back and we take that 263 out, that bottom number is actually 587,000. So the original roll forward that we had done was showing a $587,000 gap. But right now that 263,000, I wanted to be transparent that was a new number that came in. That actually pushes us to a current shortfall of 324,457. Remember that a roll forward it just moves things, everything that's in the current budget now, nothing new, nothing less. And so that's taking into consideration nothing coming over from the federal side, remembering that the 30.5 positions that we talked about at the last board meeting. If you remember, we looked at elementary, secondary, we looked at district-wide and so forth. And in there were 30.5 positions that are presently on the federal funds. And so I just wanted to draw that. So that'll be one of those questions for the board as well as the budget committee moving forward, is really starting to look at, is this a year where we start to look at this budget and we start to think about, are there things that still could be really defined and honed down and tighter? And are there things that we really want to say, in this first year, we've learned that these federal monies are really making a great impact here. We believe that these FTEs, now think about that, just to quantify this for you, 30 positions or 30.5 positions, it's approximately 2.5 to 2.7 million. Most of those positions, you budget teaching positions at 90,000, that's salary and benefits. And then the teaching assistant positions, of which there are 4, I believe, in that budget, those are like 50. And so that's why that 2.5 to 2.7. So it's right in there. That's the ballpark that we have for those 30.5 positions. So thinking about that, if we were to say all 30.5 of those, that would add $2.5 million to this budget, just to give you an idea. If everything came over. Now we know that the federal funding is one-time monies. So that's why we talk about between this year, next year, and into the next year after that, we really need to be prioritizing the priorities in the federal monies to say, what do we need to start bringing it over? So right now, remember, the budget you're looking at is just rolling everything forward, taking into consideration, health costs and contractual obligations, things like that. Those are the things, everything's in there. It's the cost of doing business. All of those pieces are in there. Is there a question on this slide? So that 324 does take into consideration that 263 that Dr. Timms shared the other evening.
So, Brian, I want to be clear, with this record amount of aid that we're anticipating, we're still going to fall short maintaining what we currently do, not adding anything new.
Right. And the initial January budget that came out from the state, that foundation aid number was 263,000 less than that. It was 38.6 something, 36, I think. So that does take that into consideration. But yes, your answer to that question is yes. Even with the over 5% increase to the Fulton City School District, we still, on a roll forward budget of approximately, as I said earlier, approximately $2.8 million, that still leaves us $324,000 short. Now, this is without making any adjustments or adding. It does, and as I said before, it does not take into consideration, are there things, specifically human resources? If we buy the desks, that's a one-time cost. Those are easy. We don't worry about those. What we do worry about is those pieces like, intervention teachers or intervention specialists or coaches or whatever, the numbers of positions that we have, a nurse that we added as part of that. All of those positions were in the last presentation and easy reference there. So yes, the answer to your question is roll forward right now. Thank you to the state for the other 263. That makes a 587 turned into 324 at the present time. This takes into consideration no increases in tax, no increase, and no utilization of reserves or fund balance. And what we're hoping with the reserves and fund balance is that 4%, as we heard the other night at the Central New York School Boards Association, it was reinforced once again that 4%, really, the state of New York is looking to have a 15% reserves and fund balance. School districts are limited to 4%. We're just over 4 at the present. This is about as strong as we've been, and that's the work of many years of the board and previous superintendents. And so that's where we're at the moment, the present time. And I know one of the pieces of legislation, there is conversation about pushing that number to higher than that, approximately 8% in the legislation. That's something that our assemblymen and senators will be considering. Other questions? So I'll give you some examples just so you get an idea of what this takes a look at. So this is just to give you an idea. If you had a 0.5%, you see that number drops to 222,000. If you remember, those of you that have been on the board before, we run these slides so you can really get an idea. It helps you really wrap your head around what this may look like. If you go, this is a 1%, so it's down to 114 then. 1.5 brings us down to $6,657. 2% actually would result in a surplus, and then of 101, and then a 2.43 gives a surplus of 193. I mean, obviously, you don't normally put together a budget to get a tax levy and a surplus. So, but that just gives you an idea. So go back to the zero down. So is there any other discussion? Just remember, this is the first run existing, everything we have now, taking in all contractual, all anticipated at this moment in time.
Could you speak to for a moment, because we've looked at all of the possibilities from no increase to the 2.43.
Yep.
And the other evening, I was one of those people that attended the meeting with Dr. Timms.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the concerns is if we don't take advantage of the levy because of the federal dollars that we currently have, which aren't going to be with us, that 2 to 3 years out, we could put the district in a very significant financial bind.
So it's a great point. So what Robin is alluding to is the other evening, what Dr. Timms pointed out. So remember that we're approximately 10% away from full funding. So this year we brought in approximately, let's say 5%. So that splits the difference. So that's our increase in foundation aid this year, which was that just about 2 point now with those new monies in there, just about 2.3 million roughly. And we can anticipate that based on the discussion that came out of the New York State Assembly and last year along with the Senate was that we can anticipate that again. So they said we're going to take 2 years to split it and get it to full funding. One of the things that Dr. Timms pointed out, so once you get there, you're at full funding. Now the question is, does the state continue to have a mechanism for a 3% cost of living? All of the school districts in the state were held save harmless. And what that means is, like, for example, I believe 5 or 6 of the districts in this county got a flat 3%. They were already fully funded. But everybody in the state that was fully funded still got their 3% to kind of, and so that's what's happened. The question is, what happens 2 years from now? How do we anticipate out? And one of the things that he talked about was really working with our legislators to really talk about how can, you talk about us wanting to have a 5-year budget projection out. We really need to know the revenue strands. And is there going to be a commitment to have, like, for us, we know the cost of doing business. We just showed you in the roll forward budget, that was a 3.7% increase. I will say that when we rolled forward, we ended a little bit higher than that. We did do a little bit of refining because there was a little bit in there around healthcare, some other areas that we felt like we could adjust, which we did. Which we always do. Every year we take an adjustment and we say, what is a really strong, comfortable number? And so that was done. But other than that, everything is a roll forwarded. And the question is, so think about it this way. I believe it was 5.47%, I believe was the number in our budget, or in our foundation aid increase from the state of New York. Now think about that. Our roll forward, though, was 3.7. So we had a 5.7 or 5.47% increase in our foundation aid. Our roll forward was 3.7. Why is the difference? Think about it. 68.5%, if you remember at our last meeting, approximately 69% of our budget comes from foundation aid. So think about it. That 5.47 is really focused on 69% of the money. Then we have approximately, I want to say it's like 29%, 20 to 29%, which is our local share. That's our tax base, all that. And then there's the other part, which is your pilots and other monies, Medicaid, so on and so forth, which is a much smaller piece of the pie. So the foundation aid is a biggest chunk of our budget as far as our revenues. But you need to think about the fact that if that number drops to a 3% increase as opposed to a 5.47, that puts us back down. Well, half of 2.3 is 1.6, right? So, I mean, if you think about that, that's approximately 2.7%, right? So that would tell you we're going to come in low again. So the question is, what happens 3 years from now? And,
and to clarify, the two questions we thought we should ask ourselves is, one, we don't know yet if the foundation aid amount, they have to address if the state every 3 years they're supposed to look to see whether or not they're providing enough foundation aid to reflect the actual cost of educating a child in New York State.
Correct.
And so they're due to do that. And we don't know what that's going to look like. We're hoping it gets done. And then the other thing he mentioned was inflation. And that really got my attention because we can't anticipate all that far forward what the inflation impact is going to be on budgetary needs. And so I thought that was a good point that he raised for us to think about as we move forward, to be prepared for that impact.
So I guess I want to ask in layman's terms, what exactly are you both suggesting?
I think what I'm suggesting is we go through the process. We have to not only look in the short term and the revenues that we've got that we've been provided by the state at this point. And I would say this is the year I wouldn't anticipate any increase like we normally get on April 1st, because I think they took care of it right up front. I think they actually went to their commitment. I think, Lynn, the biggest thing we need to be thinking about is, and I hadn't really thought about it the way he presented the other day, is what happens when we get to fully funded. And he said, Fulton, when you're 2 years from now, when you're at full funding in that foundation aid, what happens then? Fulton's not going to see a 5.47% increase. If they continue the 3% save harmless, then we would get 3%. So again, what it's going to show is that our revenues are once again going to be less than our rollover expenses or our anticipated expenses for the next year. So we constantly have to be thinking about, and then our reserves and fund balance, while they're they're strong right now. Think about if you use your savings of your own savings account. And, the other day I had to put a new furnace in my house. So $8,000 along with some other stuff that had to be repaired all got paid for. It was nice having my savings there to take care of that emergency. That's what those funds are for. Emergency kind of situations, things that come up. That's really what that 4% is, and the unrestricted fund balance. If you start using that, and if you think back and you look at our history back to 2008, 9, 10, we actually had to dip into our reserves and fund balance. Everybody did. And then it took us about 10 years, I believe it was, to build back up those reserves and fund balance, because we're a district that doesn't really over or underspend our budgets. We're pretty tight. And to see a roll forward come in at 587 and now 324, that says we did a really good job with our budget. I mean, we're pretty on. That's pretty good. And we matched up well with our 3.7% rollover matches up nicely with the 5.47. But if that number drops, the problem is then, Lynn, we end up with a gap between revenues and expenditures. And then all of a sudden we start talking about what can we do without? And what we don't want to do is get to a time where we say our kids can do without this. That's not okay. That's unacceptable. And I think we have the opportunity right now to poise ourselves out the next 3 to 4 years and really try to anticipate. And then, as Robin said, presently, I think the inflation rate was 7%, I believe is what he shared the other night. So hopefully that number will come down over time. But right now, I think that what he shared the other evening was a 7% inflation rate.
I agree with Robin. I think the only time historically where we've gone beneath the tax cap because we could, it just came back to haunt us later. And I appreciate, us wanting to look long-term. And, this budget, it might not make sense perhaps to some, but, I agree that I think we need to be long-term looking.
Yeah, this will be the first time, and Dave, thank you, for your comment. I believe that this will be the first time that most districts can even look out a year from now, knowing at least a year from now what we can anticipate. The question is, what does 24, 25 look like? We have an idea for 22, 23. We got a good idea for 23, 24. What we don't know is 24, 25, because we know the commitment from the state government was a 2 more years to get it up. So last year we got some, this year, and then next year.
Yeah, and again, Dr. Timms eats, breathes, and sleeps school funding in New York State, as well as looking around the nation. But he pointed out things like they're dealing with 22-year-old data. They're working off a 2000 census. We don't know what happens when they start working off the new data. It could be even worse for us. We don't know, because we don't know what that data is going to look like. Yep. He talked about the student with disabilities formula the other night that hasn't been addressed or looked at us in any way since 2006. That's a long time with no changes. And yet we've seen significant changes in things that we deliver to our students since 2006. So, and the expectations are different from 2006. And I'm going to look to Dave, because you've been around that long. I mean, I think I'm correct in that observation.
Yes.
So again, it's the planning for the long term. And the reason I say that is because if we don't plan for the long term, some future board, and I'm going to say my piece now, I don't want a future board to be in a position that I found myself in as a younger board member a long time ago, because we didn't have reserves and we didn't do the long-term planning. And we had a significant increase that really impacted our families. I've been very sensitive since that happened all these years later. Better than a little bit than a major impact that really impacted households in a large way. And so I just want us to be aware, as Brian moves forward with his team, that there's a lot of pieces here in the future that probably are not going to look anywhere near this bright. So,
I agree, Robin. And I think we need to be long range looking, and, sometimes that's, hard to see in the immediate. But like you, I've been on boards at difficult times as well. And that's not to fault any prior board, but they made decisions that they did. And I think that we just need to hopefully be more globally looking and long range looking.
This last slide is a slide that I know the board, it's actually being used well before I arrived, but this is a one that we often, I think it's probably the most utilized. It really captures so much information. What you're looking at is, and I've used this slide before, 2012-13 all the way through the roll forward budget, the 22-23 that you see there in bold. My business team chime in at any time you want there. But what it does is it shows you longitudinally what the budgets have been. It shows you the enacted tax levies dating back to 12-13, the increase from the prior year and the percent of increase. And then if you go all the way to the right, that was the actual tax cap. So like tonight, I talked about 2.43% is our tax cap, and that last year was 4.08. So if you look at last year, 4.08% could have yielded $880,000. And that's money that just keeps going every year, up to 880. We used zero last year. It was the first time, actually ever, that when you look at this, we had a negative tax cap in 17-18, which was interesting. So we had a reduction in our tax cap of $357,000 that year. But as you can see, boards have, excuse me, over the years, they rarely have gone to the tax limit until like we had a 0.43. And then to make up for that minus 1.74, we did go to the tax cap 3 years in a row. And in the end, I think it was a little over 1% a year over time. And then last year, zero with COVID and everything else, we were able to be pretty flat. The other thing I'd like to point out is we had a very tiny increase in our budget. Look at 1920, 73,354,000. In 2021, we were 73,777,000. We went up just about $400,000. And so you can see we had a bit of a flat budget there. So right now we're bouncing back. I think we did a good job that year. There were some issues from the state. So I think we've done a good job with that. But this is a nice slide for your reference over time. Dom or your team, anything you'd ask or answer to that or add to that?
I think that sums it up.
Okay. Any questions? I always provide, I try to not provide so much information, but there's some important pieces there tonight. And we'll be going over this with the budget committee at our next meeting. And I think one of the things that as you ponder and you talk to constituents is really starting to think about, do we start to build in a little bit of the FTEs that are presently, or some of the things that are on the federal funds, those one-shot deals, and get them off there sooner than later, or just make sure, or not. But the longer we wait, we have to think about, okay, that's more that we're trying to get in. So I think as we prioritize, I think we're taking a really good look over the next month or so. And are there things that really belong in there that we should say, these look like something we need to continue? That obviously needs to be considered. So this is our first blush at this budget.
Brian, anything that you think that we should, because you have data that supports it?
It's early,
Yeah.
the positions, it's early.
Right.
I mean, it's funny because we're 5 months into the school year, solid months, but at the same time, I mean, we've seen a few things, some contractual things around our peaceful schools, for example. We seem to be getting quite a bit of traction with that impacting a lot of kids. But again, jury's still out. We're still collecting the information. We know where we're seeing some gains. I think that's important. We also are starting to see where do we still have some holes for kids. We added that special education support in if you remember, in January and December into January, we added that additional special education support position because we said, there's a bit of there's a lag here for our students with disabilities. We need to get at this a little bit differently. So that's the way we did that.
I don't think we should increase it more than we have to. There's still people still struggling from COVID.
Yep.
Gas prices are up, home heating costs are up, groceries. I
Yep.
mean,
No, I understand.
I don't believe in zero increase. Like Dave said, it comes to bite you later on. So, but I don't want to see it overdone. So that's my thought.
Yep. Point taken, Tim.
Thank you.
Any other questions around the budget? It's a lot of information. You can always reach out to us. We always seem to, I think we try to pare it down some, and it always seems to add up a little bit more. So,
Can I just ask a simple question, just so I can maybe make a connection that you've probably already answered, but I'm still trying to understand this. So the federal one-time monies that we have to take that into consideration and maybe make an increase in taxes to make up for those federal monies that we might not get in the future. Is that sort of what we're looking at in summarization? One part of it.
So essentially, my understanding is will the state be able to continue the kinds of increases? Some of the monies that I think are coming from the state are coming from those federal funds as well, out of the state. So the federal money, the monies that are in our foundation aid, my understanding are also some of the federal monies that the state got. So you see so the question, Jen, will be, what kinds of gains will we see once we reach the Save Harmless? In other words, once we reach the foundation, that we meet our 100%, that we're fully funded, right?
Mm-hmm.
The question will be, for us, 5.47 is the number that we had to have to show our 3.7, and see how close it was. We were 327. That's how close we were. And we can figure that out. What we don't want to see is like what we used to have right now. A year ago, we had a $1.2 million gap. After the first runs from the state, it was $1.2 million. And if you look back over a series of budgets, you're going to see a number like that. You're going to see a 1.2. I think we even had a 2.1 at one time, one of my years here. And so I think that's what you have to see. So the real issue is, how do we anticipate revenue down the road? And knowing that the foundation aid, like you said, is, if it's fully funded, that's 68.5%. But we still have approximately 28% is our local share. And if we don't up our local share, see how it starts to widen the gap again?
Mm-hmm.
So that, and I know nobody wants to, to hear that. Nobody wants to see that. So the question is, how do you be strategic in about what's a balance? And it's great to see this year that we got that. And you could see how the boards over time on that last slide actually do that over time. They had little bits and, pieces each year. They never really went to full funding early on. There were some times there were fours that never went and did that. Like we last year.
Just not to confuse things, but remember, there was a time too that boards were criticized for not doing their fair share at local effort, that they wanted the state to come across with all the money, and the state said, well, you should be doing your fair share locally. So, and that we can't predict. I mean, that changes with the politics. I mean, you can't with personalities.
Yeah.
But to Jen's point, I think the federal funds are through 2024.
Right.
And we have a cushion. But that was kind of why I was inquiring surrounding the AIS conversation at the last meeting was, what's sustainable past 2024?
Right.
We want those supports for our kids. And I think that's part of the conversation for this budget is we don't want to miss an opportunity to make sure that we are as funded as possible in terms of budget.
Right. So what we're really talking about is it's like we're doing, like you said, that we're doing the right now, this one, putting together next year's budget. Are there pieces of that? Are there FTEs, full-time employees, that we really want to make sure, those equivalent positions really need to get into the general fund. So we start just carrying them. So they're a part of who we are. And then, there are also, other positions that may not be able to be carried forward that, and so that's the challenge that we have. What we don't want to do is 3 years from now, when we're talking about the 24-25 budget, and say, okay, now what do we want to move over from the federal? Because that could be a massive amount of money. And as I said, if we just took all of the full-time employees right now and just said how much of that, and I was eyeballing it at 30 and a half employees, that's approximately $2.5 to $2.7 million. So think about that. If we put that in our budget right now and said all of them come over, we'd have almost a $3 million gap if we just took all of those. So the question will be is what do we need to be seeing? And really it's going to be, what is our kids' data showing us? How are our kids performing? What's the feedback that we're hearing from the classrooms and the schools about where do we need to continue to drive funds and monies, at the same time building programs, for the future. I mean, we have some great things going on in our district right now that are grant driven. And some of those also we need to keep an eye on, like Early College High School is a grant driven. P-TECH this year, they built in from the state of New York this year. It looks like in the current budget, they're actually going to extend P-TECH funding beyond the time the original grants ran out, which was this year for Oswego County. So that's good news. So those are all good things which help keep our costs down to support a program like a P-TECH program.
And we're also spending a lot of that money right now, if I'm not mistaken, just to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. We're also spending an awful lot of the funding with professional development and educating our current staff members so they're able to maybe certify, or we can use what they know and broaden that out into other schools throughout the district, correct?
Absolutely. Sustainability and capacity, Ms. Manville, you're right on target. The
So
goal is making sure that we provide the knowledge and the skills, so that well beyond these budgets, that those knowledge and skills are possessed well beyond the work that's being done now. So that's the idea of sustainability. It's a great question. Other questions around the budget? Okay. The monthly finance report, Dr. Lisi.
I'll pull that right up here in 2 seconds.
I should also say Miss Nichols. I believe she's on there. She's not on my screen, but I think I saw her as well. There she is. Over there. Sorry, Miss Nichols. You weren't showing on my screen. There you are.
Great. Just going to change the view here real quick.
Can you make that any larger, Dr. Lisi?
I can.
There you go. Thank you.
There we are. Hey, Ms. Nichols, I'll have you help me out if you're willing to do so, but I'll start out. We're just going to compare prior year to date with current year to date, generally in line with where we were previous year. Just looking at our current expenditures, again, no anomalies, nothing out of the ordinary. Ms. Nichols, if you're on, just one area of just of note is our debt service principal and interest, and I'm assuming that has to do with our capital project expenditures at this point.
We've started paying for the energy performance contract. So not the other project, just the energy performance has made a difference.
That'll do it. Any other thoughts, Ms. Nichols?
No, I think we're pretty much in line where we would expect to be, and pretty much in line with where we were last year at this point. So
very good. Any questions?
And I think it's something we're watching very closely because, as we've heard earlier this evening, the costs of doing business have gone up. Just access to materials, access to other resources. I think the costs are going up, and we're still seeing that. Supply chain issues are more prevalent than we think they are. So it's just something we need to continue keeping a very close eye on as we move forward.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, and the final thing I have this evening is just a COVID update, just a couple things. We're looking at Tests are available at all the schools, but we're exploring doing another distribution. We had a distribution last Thursday. We're also talking about doing possibly one. We will get the information out tomorrow, exploring another one tomorrow. Obviously, they're also available at the schools for families that would like to have the access to the COVID testing. Good news is the numbers continue to drop. I think that's the last thing I saw when I left the house this morning on one of the reports. It was good to see. I think on our 7-day count, I think it was 38 was here as well. So that's good news. And I also wanted to say, and obviously we're still waiting on information around the mask update. We will do whatever the state directs. So, I mean, hopefully we're supposed to be hearing, it seems to be the end of that first week in March. So hopefully we'll get some answers, and these numbers will continue to drop, and this will become something that's in our rear view mirror more than our windshield looking out forward. So are there any questions around those pieces at this point in time? And we're planning a communication out to our families before we return next week. I see Miss LePage on there, and I didn't forget. So I wanted Reagan to talk a little bit about our student advisory. A little bit, we talked about some things at our last meeting. So Reagan, would you like to just talk about that experience a little bit for our board this evening?
I would love to. So the Student Advisory Committee is basically a group of students that were selected, and we just talk about issues that we see in school. For example, we a couple weeks ago talked about social issues that we feel are seen throughout schools. And my favorite thing about this committee is that it's not just one school talking about issues. So it's not just high schoolers talking about things that are in their school. It's, I believe it's 6th graders to 12th graders. So I get to hear during these meetings the viewpoint of a 6th grader, the viewpoint of an 8th grader. And we get to talk about how, you know, there might be a reoccurring social issue that is seen throughout all of these grades. And we just give recommendations about how each school can handle it, how adults that handle like social emotional learning and things like that might be able to help students. And I think it's a really good opportunity for kids in our district to share opinions that they have to adults about things that they see in school.
Is that with Miss Geithner? Is that with Miss Tiffany's crew? That's her group, correct?
Miss Tiffany and Tammy Sheldon, our SEL success coach, along with Carrie Foster, who's here at the junior high and is the school culture coach here at the junior high, at the facilitator of the school culture committee here at the junior high. So we have broad representation from every grade level, and some of our administrators get to go and sit and listen to these great conversations. I was there at the last meeting for a short period of time and just genuinely impressed with the students and what they bring to the table and how respectful they are of one another and solution focused they are. So it's very exciting work.
Now that's what I'm hearing. I haven't had a chance to go over and hear, but I look forward to just listening sometime. But Reagan, you captured it well. And actually, if you think back to our social emotional learning, or our strategic coherence plan update around SEL, we actually, this was that evening, but unfortunately both of our student representatives had other obligations and couldn't get there or couldn't get tuned in. So we wanted to make sure that our students' voices were shared. I think it's going to be a very important committee as we move forward, as it's a great way to reflect our students' voices and what they're experiencing, which is why we're here in the first place. So that's why we're here. And with that, I believe that's the conclusion.
Can I ask a question before we move on?
Sure.
To Reagan? Reagan? Yep. Thank you for the summary, Reagan. So it sounds like a really great committee that is put together and really a broad representation. And just out of curiosity, has there been any issues that you've discussed that you've seen actually improve through the schools? I'm sure the conversations are very, very important. But if you guys discussed an issue that has been resolved or in the process of being resolved? And if so, could you just like shed some light on that and let us know what happened?
I would love to. So I know in the beginning of the year, we were talking about how there is a problem with like the LGBTQ plus community and the usage of bathrooms. And it was seen like in the junior high that they did offer a bathroom that was all gender. And high schoolers were like, that's crazy. You know, you're offering a bathroom to people who might not feel comfortable going into a certain gendered bathroom. So a couple weeks later, the high school actually implemented a all gender bathroom, and the praise for that bathroom for certain students in our school was outstanding. Kids were saying, you know, I feel more comfortable, because there were stories about how one student had to go all the way from upstairs and had to go to the nurse's office all the way downstairs to use the bathroom because they didn't feel comfortable going into one bathroom. So creating that bathroom helped students in our school feel more included and more heard. And, you know, that issue is seen a lot, is kids feeling not comfortable going to the bathroom. So I think it's really cool that, you know, our committee talked about that and that issue, and then it was resolved.
And that's
Thank you.
continued to be
That's
monitored. I mean, just because we implement doesn't mean we have to make sure that it continues to work for us all and creating access for all, right? Is that, so do you guys come back around to things? Is that kind of the idea?
So yes, you know, we were talking about that, and then they implemented that bathroom, and then we gave feedback. You know, what did you hear from students after that was put into the high school? And it was, of course, all good things. And we came back to that issue and we're like, was there more that we could do? What else could we do to create a sense of safety and inclusiveness in school? And we just talk about that every single time. And I think it's really, really cool.
That is great that you guys are being heard and that you're seeing results from it. So that's fantastic. How many students are involved in this committee about?
So it's 2 students from every grade. So, and I believe it goes down to 6th grade. So that's like 12, 14, if a little more, a little less.
So would you say that would be a good representation? Do you think the students know who to go to if they have an issue in each grade level?
I think because this is the first year we're doing it, I think it's a good start, because I know in the beginning they talked about, you know, we want students that are involved in a lot of things. So like looking at 12th grade, I am included in a lot of clubs and things like that. And the other representative is of like the sports and athletic aspect. So getting that well-roundedness of students and doing that for every grade, I think is really important. My hope is that this advisory grows, because I feel like 2 students from every grade isn't enough voice. There should be more. But I do think that they know, like, you can go to one of us talked about, it's mentioned in school.
Well, it sounds like a great start, and I'm glad that you guys feel like you're being heard and you have a voice. Thank you.
Of course.
Good discussion. If there's no further discussion, I'll turn it back over to you, Ms. Griffin.
Okay. Item 4.01, approve financial reports.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo,
Yes.
and Mrs. Lyons. Did we lose Mrs. Lyons?
I don't see her on here.
I think it said that she left. Maybe she got disconnected or something.
Okay.
All right. Item 4.02, disposal of surplus property.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo,
Yes.
and Mrs. Lyons. I think we just lost her again.
All right. Now on to first reading of policies. And Dave, I'm going to start with you because you mentioned you had a policy you wanted to talk about.
I just wondered if Brian could elaborate on any of the budget related ones, from the deadline to budget priorities to the dissemination of information. What changed in those policies?
Let me see if this is the folder. I'm not sure if this is the right one or not. Let's see. I wasn't anticipating. Let me see here. Records management. These are first reads.
Yeah. Yep.
So, yep. I can either highlight. Looks like I got the right folder here. I can either do a summary in tomorrow's update and provide that information. Most of the budget ones, Mr. Cordone, we're just updating the dates. We didn't have much change in them. Flying through them 1 second here. I did have the folder sitting here. So budget planning, for example, 6110, the last sentence came out, and then the cross references was the recommendation from the attorney. So one sentence was at the end, which was the Board of Education review the budget for the ensuing school year prior to approving the tax levy. That was the one sentence that our attorney took out, and the committee.
Okay. I just
Budget
wondered.
deadlines, there was one sentence. What I could do is I could highlight these. They're on the Miss Perry on the website, the policy committee. These
Right.
are also listed
Yes.
under the policy
You're
committee
correct.
there
Yep, and
with the
there's
red
a
lines.
There's a full agenda, Dave, with everything that we looked at, and each one of the policies is there, and any of the changes are in red.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, and so I can either highlight them for everybody, or they're also there with the red lines right on them.
I was going to say, Brian, the ones I read had all of the notations.
Yes, I believe they did, because we provide that for the policy committee. And then what we do is we provide clean copies as well, just so they see what they look like minus the red lines, so they see both. But I
Thank
can
you.
highlight them
Thank you.
as well and make them an attachment in our budget or in our daily update.
I just know that we've had conversation about obviously the dissemination of information in particular, and then I wasn't sure about priorities. I know how that's been handled historically by the board, but just wondered if there was anything new that you wanted to convey to the public.
Yeah, no, it's a great with a different term. That 6112. There's not one thing we changed.
Okay.
Yep. Most of them we didn't do really any change. The feeling was they aligned. What the lawyer, when his feedback was just there was a little bit of redundancy. But other than that, there's very few changes. But what I realized when we did these, they were all dated 2012 as the last review, and I felt like we needed to bring them into the 2021-22 school year.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Great question.
Does anyone else have any questions with regard to the first reading of these policies? Okay, moving along. Item 6.01, approve the Committee on Special Education recommendations.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
and Mrs. Lyons.
Item 6.02, to approve the Erie One BOCES Education Law 2D opt-in.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
and Mrs. Papalardo.
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
She's still not on.
I think she's back out again. Yep, she was in and out again. Okay, I wonder if my colleagues would like to batch items 7.01 through 7.03.
Move it.
I do not want to batch them.
Okay,
I'll second, and then we can back out what Jess wants.
okay. So,
So I have a question on the spring athletic coaches.
I don't
And
think that. Yep, I'm not there yet. So,
okay.
I just want to do 7.01, 7.02, and 03 as one batch.
Okay.
Okay. So I have it moved and seconded, correct?
Yep.
Is there any discussion on those three items? Mrs. Perry, yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
She's there.
Mr. Hedlund,
You could do a thumbs up, Lynn. She's a thumbs up.
There you go.
Mrs.
Yeah.
Capoleto.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. 7.04 to appoint the community school program teacher and teaching assistants.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville, Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
Yes.
and Mrs. Capoleto.
Yes.
I'd like to wondered if you wanted to batch 7.05 through 7.08, and that still doesn't. We're not there yet, Jess.
Yep.
I'll move it.
Second.
Any discussion on 7.5 through 7.08? Appointments? Mrs. Perry, yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mrs. Capoleto,
Yes.
and Mrs. Lyons.
Yes.
Okay, item 7.09, appoint spring athletic coaches.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, there are several missing positions on there right now. One in particular, but what's our plan for those positions right now? As far as the ones that aren't listed, there's no head coach.
So we're in the process of filling some of those other positions, and I was going to provide an update in executive session also about something that could impact coaching as well. So
And when does the season start?
season started, I believe, 3/21. Let me pull my calendar up. It's late this year, 3/21.
Okay.
So we have a board meeting on the 8th as well.
Okay.
Are these positions posted publicly, or is it just internally?
Jerry?
They have currently been posted internally, and Mr. Els is reviewing those internal applicants.
And that's our
Is
standard procedure?
Is it a
Yes.
policy to only do it internally and not externally to post?
We have done it both ways, depending on the level of interest and qualifications of the internal candidates.
So it has been posted internally?
It has been posted internally. Some of the
And
positions that are
how do we
not.
decide whether we're going to post it publicly?
If there isn't interest or anyone who's certified or experienced, we typically also post it externally.
And that's a policy?
It is not a policy no, it is our practice.
And if we can, okay, so I guess we can talk about maybe adding that as a maybe policy or something, right? Because I don't know how.
I'm not
What is
really
the
sure
practice
that
for
that
that?
falls under policy. It's an administrative function. Remember, we employ the superintendent employs everybody else.
Right.
Right. That's been our standard practice. We always post internally. If you've made it, we just, for example, just posted our principalships, those two that are open. And then I believe, was it today, Ms. Geithner, I saw today, or today's Tuesday, right? I saw them, they were posted publicly. Is that correct? Or
That's correct.
externally?
Correct.
So we generally go on a weekend, Ms. Mainville, and then we go out if there's not a bank of candidates.
If
And there's
you
no
have,
violation of contract, correct?
Correct.
what was that, Dave?
I said there was no violation of contract with the FTA or Well, that can be the only group I can think of that would be providing coaching
Okay,
candidates.
So would we employ a candidate that has no experience but expresses an interest because they're a teacher over somebody who externally might be a better fit because of contract?
I don't have the contract language right in front of me, Ms. Papalardo. We can check that. I'm not sure. I have to check ours. I don't know the verbiage, and I don't want to comment specifically on the contract without reading it verbatim, because some districts, it is required if there is an employee who expresses they get preference.
Yep.
I do not have the language in front of me, and I don't have it memorized.
That's okay. Understood.
Yeah,
Understood.
but I will check that, because that's a great question.
I'd be interested in that too. If it's a teacher that's interested, or if it is a physical education teacher that's interested. I think I know that there is a difference in some districts. I'm not sure what our practice is in Fulton, but yes, I'd be interested in knowing that too, please.
Are you saying, Jen, are you asking about the job description and qualifications?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yep.
Are we all set to vote? Anybody else? Okay. So we moved, we second, we've had discussion. Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons,
Abstain.
and Mr. Crandall.
Yes.
Item 7.10 to appoint athletic contest supervision.
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo,
Yes.
and Mrs. Lyons.
Yes.
Item 7.11, approve the termination of a probationary appointment.
Move it.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Cordone,
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville,
Yes.
Mr. Crandall,
Yes.
Mrs. Papalardo,
Yes.
Mrs. Lyons.
Yes.
Let's see, board forum. Reagan, nice to have you back. Why don't you kick us off?
I think everybody did great on their presentations tonight. Thank you for letting me speak on the student advisory committee. I really love being a part of that committee, and I like speaking highly of it. I'm happy that it is February break. Very, very happy. And I'm glad it's not snowing, even though it's raining, which is gross, but I'm glad to relax. That's it.
Thank you. Dave.
I agree with Reagan on all fronts. But I want to thank Reagan for her leadership and her representation. And we are so fortunate to have you here with us. And I want to thank Brian for the continued inclusion of student voice. Thanks. That's it.
Jen.
I too am very thankful for February break. I'm also very thankful that our students are feeling heard and that their voice matters and they have a say in what goes on at school. I think that's very important. I think that sends out a good message and it helps with the culture of each building and for Fulton. So thank you for Reagan for that presentation and for speaking and for representing, and to all of the other committee members. That's all I have tonight.
Jess.
Yes. Reagan, thank you. I love hearing about that. That's awesome. And that you guys are being heard. I want to welcome Danielle. It's good to put a name to a face. And thanks to Paula for all the hard work that she's, put in with all the reports. Dr. Lisi loved the statistics for the communication. I thought that was really interesting because I think that we kind of sometimes don't realize how far our reach really is. And sometimes I feel like people put down Facebook as far as, oh, not everyone's on Facebook, but kind of shows that we do get a lot from the social media. And that's great. I mean, I would have never expected our numbers to be that high. So I really appreciate you bringing that to our attention. And thanks to Robin and Dave for, conservative planning for the budget and stuff. I have to agree with everything that you guys said. And I truly think that our community, our stakeholders, when they kind of understand what we're doing a little bit better. And I think that like the pie charts and everything that we've done in our past newsletters have been super helpful. I don't think that people have issues with those kinds of, raises in their taxes or whatever, if they know that the money is being put to good use. And I think that our transparency has been helpful with that. So that's all.
Yeah.
Here, I'm thankful that the temperature's not below zero. That everybody's doing well. Reports were all good tonight. Brian, relax. I can tell you're not relaxed. Relax. Enjoy some vacation time, everybody. That's it.
Lynn.
I think everybody has said just about everything that I have thought of. I do want to say a shout out to our athletics, how sectionals have transpired, and how proud we are of all of them. And that's it. Thank you.
Lynn, that was a good reminder because we've had an exceptionally good season, not only on the playing field, but our students, again, as a reminder, we have a lot of student athletes, much to be proud of, and very proud of those kids. Reagan, super proud of you. Thank you so much. You continue to give. And I just want to give a shout out to you. And would you please share with your committee how much we appreciate your advisory group, everyone giving up their time to participate. We couldn't do it if you wouldn't give us your time. So it is appreciated. And I hope that you continue to find it useful. And hopefully some of those kids will stick with it that you leave behind. But you are a fine example for them to look up to. And I'm grateful for that. Again, all the reports were great. A lot going on with budget. It's a lot to understand. We will continue to do our best to try to break it down. But if you're not living and breathing it, it can get very complicated. Seemingly so. You have to be in the thick of it. I've been doing this a long time, and it's a big learning curve, folks. And so if you have questions, reach out to people. We'll do our best to answer and try to put it in simple terms as much as possible. We don't mean to make it sound complicated. It just sometimes it's just a lot to wrap your head around. With that said, I would like to ask my colleagues, you need 5-minute break, and then we'll move into executive session. So on behalf of my colleagues, to anyone watching this evening, we appreciate you joining us. We hope you will go away from us with having learned something. We are going to take a 5-minute break. Then we're going to convene into an executive session. We will come back into a public session to close out this meeting. I do not know how long that will be. So we're going to take, I'm going to ask someone to move item 8.02.
Move it. Second.
Any discussion? And Mrs. Perry, I'm a yes.
Mr. Cordone?
Yes.
Mrs. Mainville?
Yes.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes.
Mrs. Pappalardo?
Yes.
And Mrs. Lyons?
Yes.
All right, folks, I'll see you in 5 minutes, and we'll get the rest of our work done. Thanks. Item 8.03, adjournment. Would someone move it?
Move it.
Move it. Second.
Any discussion? And if you can show me with a thumbs up or a Brenda and I, everybody in favor? And Brenda's an aye. Okay, it's unanimous. I thank you all. And stay well, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. Enjoy the rest of your time off.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night again, Miss Lynn.